All right, everybody, let's start. So today we're gonna be looking, well, first of all, welcome back, everybody. We're gonna be looking at 4 different things. The first one is we're gonna understand better what's a front end and what's a back end. In specific, in the last lesson, we worked on our front end. We worked on our personal website, and that's what the user can see. And today we're gonna understand what a back end is. Then we're going to understand what Node.js is and how we can use it to create our first server, meaning our first backend. And finally, we're going to try to host the website that you guys worked on the last time onto our first server. First of all, we're going to output just some plain text to see how the server works, and then we're going to pass on to something a little bit more complex, which is in this case is in plain HTML. So, what is a backend? A backend is basically a machine that allows us to refer to it from our front end, which is what the user can see, and in order to retrieve our data. For instance, when we do a search in Google, Google sends that information to a machine that uses an algorithm to output something to the front end. Now, of course, we're not going to be able to see the algorithm itself, the search engine that Google uses, because that works on the machine itself. What we're seeing is the front end, the graphics of it. We're inputting something and we're receiving just the plain output, just a group of results, which is in this case a search result. We can work on our backend with Node.js. In this regards, of course, we can use other languages. For instance, with Arman, if you guys are learning Python, there's another framework that is called Django, and it's basically almost the same thing as Node.js, and it allows us to create a backend, create a server. Now, what Node.js is a runtime built on top of Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. Now in English, this means that we're basically using an event-driven system to input something, which we're going to call a request, and then we're going to get something in return, and that's called a response. How do we execute them? Well, first of all, we just download the packager from the website, we install it, and then we go on our terminal and we just type node myfile.js. So we're going to create a file.js, we're going to initialize the server, and then by inputting this in the terminal, we're going to actually execute the code. So Node.js also works with modules using a package manager called NPM, which stands for Node Package Manager. There's many modules that people built through open source and stuff, and it's very useful to look at them because they can make our life way easier. For instance, right now we're creating a server using just plain JavaScript and Node.js as a framework, but next time we're going to see an implementation with a module called Express, which is going to look way easier for us to do the same exact thing. So, what is exactly a server though? A server is a computer, so it can be this computer right here. Today we're going to host the server locally on my machine, so my computer can be a server. Usually a server is a very powerful computer that manages to access a centralized resource, for instance a database that we have on another endpoint, and then result in a network, meaning we're asking something from our machine to the server, and the server returns something specific, which is a response. Of course, we're working like a function. You can think of it as being a function, meaning we're inputting information to get something else in return. Now, usually in web applications, as well as modern iOS or Android applications that refer to the web, we're using a server to create an API, which stands for Application Programming Interface. This is a series of endpoints, a series of URL that we are accessing from our front end, and then give us specific options. For instance, let's say that we want to get a specific ID for a track that is on Spotify's database. Well, Spotify will have an API where you can basically input a URL in your Node program, or even sometimes you can even return something from your browser. And by inputting that specific URL, you're accessing a specific endpoint in Spotify's API, which will return, in this case, the ID of a track. In the next lesson, we're going to look more specifically at what types of requests we can do and how different they are. Because, for instance, some requests, they can be made by a browser, and some other requests can just be made from a terminal. And the reason being that sometimes, we don't want the actual user, the actual person to access some data, but we just want a machine to do it. Anyway, we're going to look at it more specifically in the next lesson. So, of course, when we develop, we have a server locally on our machine, and then we look at GitHub during the last lesson, and of course we can upload our server on services like GitHub, or I personally use Heroku, which allows you to deploy a server on the internet on a specific machine that is not this computer, but it's actually another machine contained in Heroku servers, and that allows us to actually deploy the web application. When we run our code, as a default address, it initializes at this one. The column here specifies a port. So in this case, it's 8080, which is the standard for Node.js, but we can also customize that. Okay, so today we're going to look at 4 things again. How we can interact with our backend, how we can use Node.js to create a backend, and then how to write our first server using the framework Node.js, and finally how to host our website on our server. Now, this, I don't know if you guys remember, this was the website that I gave you as a template the last time. It was just a plain HTML static website in which I present myself. You can send me an email and you can look at the website that was our website for TechLab. Now I'm gonna go on Atom, my ID, and I'm gonna create a new file. And I'm going to call it so I'm going to save it as being untitled server.js. Hopefully here's not. Okay, so we're using, in this case, we're going to be using a module that is already contained in the basic installation of Node.js, and that is HTTP. So we're going to create a variable, and then we're going to assign it to the HTTP module. Then we're going to say, okay, now I can make use of the HTTP module to create a server. I don't know if you guys can see it. Yeah. And so I'm going to say, okay, create my server, and then in here I'm going to have a function where I'm going to have an input and an output. Now, this is not correct. And we're here. Now, the first thing that we have to do is write a header for our response, because there's a kind of like format when it comes to responses, and this is the first step to create our response. So we're going to write a header, that takes in 2 basic components. If you're not sure on what to do, again, there's always my reference here at mrcola.github.io. It basically explains everything that we're doing today. It also shows a little bit of the code that I'm going to be using in our lesson today. Now, the first thing that we have to do is, where did we go? The first thing that we're going to have to do is write a response code. The standard for a success response code is 200. So that's the first argument of our function rest.writeHead. In the second one, we have to specify what kind of output we're going to render. In this case, it's just going to be plain text. So we're going to create an object, because I'm using the curly braces. And then we're going to say, okay, content type, text. So after doing this, we're going to say, okay, once the response ends, send a message. In this case, we're going to say, hello world. Don't forget your things. And then one last thing, we have to initialize our server at a specific port. As I said, the standard for Node.js is 8080, so we're going to listen at 8080. Okay. Now let me take this out. Okay. So I'm going to save it. Now, yeah, this should work. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to open my terminal, and I'm going to say, okay, node of server.js. And if I didn't make a mistake, it should work at localhost. Oops, 8080. And in fact, it says hello world. Now, this is not, of course, HTML, but it's already a server that hosts a message, that hosts an object. And that object can be whatever you want. It can be HTML, it can be an image, it can be basically whatever you want. Usually, when we're working with static websites, meaning websites that don't actually change their information inside, we're just working with simple HTML. Now, I want to point something out. There is a big difference between the console of a front end, which is this one. So in here, I can just say, for instance, okay, hello world, and it will just output something. And this console. To be more specific, I'll console log this works. And so basically, this console logs output only in the machine. This is very useful when, for instance, we want to understand when a user logged in our web app, when the user targeted a specific endpoint in our server, and so on. So every time that I update my code, unfortunately, I have to press Control-C on Mac and restart my server. Of course, we can automatize this process, but it's a little bit more complicated. So maybe we'll look at it in the future. So in this case, if I reload the web page, I should see a message. Now, right now it just says this works, but what if we wanted to display today's date? Well, I would create a new var which accesses a date, and then I'm going to console log this user accessed my web app on plus today. Is it today? Yeah. Okay. I save it, and then I reload the server. Now, if we go here, we're still going to see hello world, but we're also going to see this user accessed my web app on Friday, April the 6th. And this is very useful because, for instance, if somebody wants to understand when that specific person accessed my website, this way I am aware of it. Of course, it doesn't end here, the whole thing. What we can do is also host a web page, and that's the goal for today. The way we do it is we require another module of Node.js that is called FileStream, and then we open our index.html file with that FileStream, and then we let the response write the actual HTML file. In specific, we're going to require another module which is called FS, which stands for FileStream. In here, we're going to say FS read file. This should be the syntax. And then in here, I don't have an HTML file yet, so I'm just going to create one and copy whatever I created for my website. I'm going to save it as my website.html. And then I'm going to say, okay, let me go to my website, and I'm going to view the page source. I'm going to copy everything out, and then I'm going to copy it back to this one. Oops, not here, but here. Okay, so right now I should have my website ready to go. And then in here, let's change the design a little bit. Right here, I'm gonna have this in here. Okay. So the first thing that the function takes in is the actual name of my file. In this case, my website.html. And then a function which is gonna have an error and a data. In case in which my function is not able to render the actual HTML or read the file, in this case because we're working with a file stream, it's going to display an error in this variable. And then in here, we're going to say, okay, we always have to end responses. Otherwise, they're still going to keep running until we stop it. So it's really important that we take care of every response we send to the server. And then we're going to say, okay, write data. Data is basically the variable that is nested into the parameter of this function and that refers to my website.html. So my website.html is contained here. This is contained here. Okay. This one should be here. This should be fine. Let's see if I did something wrong or not. I'm gonna reload my server. Oh, hold on. In order for me to display this console log in my web app every time a user refreshes the page, I have to nest it into the http.createServer method. So let's see. Okay, and it's not displaying the actual web page, and that's probably because we don't have this one set up. This should be okay. So we have website.html, and one change that I didn't make, but I just copied the whole code so that we're gonna go a little faster, is rather than text plain, now I'm working with text HTML. So rather than just plain text, I am displaying an HTML file. And that's why I got not an error, but it didn't display it the right way, because I was using just plain text, so it was just displaying a bunch of strings rather than an HTML file. Now it's gonna understand that I am putting an actual HTML file, and so it's gonna display it as HTML, as a website, as a normal website. So I'm gonna reload the server, and it works. Of course, my photo is not here because the source is in my GitHub pages, but we have an actual website up and running on our server. Another thing that I wanted to mention is you don't need to reload the server every time you're working on your design, meaning on your front end. Let's say that I want to change, for instance, my name, and rather than Francesco, I'm going to call Mark. So I'm going to save my HTML file, and rather than reloading my server, I'm just going to reload it. And so I just reloaded the web page, and I can still keep working, keep developing my front end without actually reloading the server. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to understand better how I can make requests, because as you have seen in here, we just work with response rather than request, although we also have request. Now request relates with, for instance, you know when Google when I say hello, this is a query in the request. This is part of the request. So in Node.js, we'll have something that checks on this parameter and then, builds up a response based on that parameter. And that's where the backend comes into work. We're just sending this information to Google server. We're not seeing how Google computes this information out, but we're spitting some. But Google is retrieving a result that in this case is just a result of a search, but it can be many things in the case of a web app. Okay, so in the next lesson, we're just going to see how those stepper requests are different and how they differ. For instance, in whether you can ask the server something from your browser rather than an actual machine, etc., etc. And then we're going to understand how to deploy a Node server on an external third-party service, which in this case will be Heroku. Heroku just, what it does is it basically takes the code that I just wrote in server.js and it puts in a computer in their server, so that whenever I go in my browser right here, TechLab space, this is an Heroku app. Now, since this is free, the server goes to sleep, meaning the machine turns itself off until I make the request of turning it on. And in a second, this is TechLab's website, and I hosted it on Heroku, meaning that there's going to be a Node server on Heroku that takes something in and returns something out. One example could be, for instance, whether I completed the CAPTCHA or not. And, well, if I just input some basic information, it says, please complete reCAPTCHA. What it did, for instance, right now, it sent a request to my server on Heroku, and Heroku said, hold on one second, I did not check on the CAPTCHA verification, so I return an error, and the error gets displayed on my front end. That's basically how servers work. I ask for something, and then I get something in return, whether it's true or false. In this case, there's a value that is false because I didn't finish my CAPTCHA. So yeah, we're going to be using Heroku to deploy a simple web server. I'm going to be walking around right now. What I would like you guys to do is try it out, look at my reference, and try to render your website using your first server. So try to use my syntax that I uploaded on my GitHub that you can find right here. And if something is not clear, just let me know. Thank you.